Welcome back to The Explainer. Today, we're jumping straight into a seriously messy, undeclared colonial conflict that you might not hear about every day, but absolutely forged the brutal American way of war. It's called Father Le Loutre's War. It raged from 1749 to 1755, and as we'll see, it directly set the stage for one of the most infamous, tragic events in North American history. Okay, let's dive right into this roadmap. We're going to trace this whole thing logically, starting with the spark in Halifax, looking at the resistance and Father Le Loutre, the rise of irregular warfare, the, frankly, horrifying scalp bounty system, the fortified Chignecto frontier, and finally, how it all culminated in the 1755 Acadian deportation. Section 1. The Catalyst of Halifax. So, the spark that ignited this whole powder keg was a massive, incredibly sudden British expansion into a region that had actually been delicately balanced for decades. Just look at this timeline. It shows exactly how fast things unraveled. In 1749, the British show up and found Halifax. Boom. Right away in 1750, forts are going up as the frontier totally hardens. They actually try for a peace treaty in 1752, but it falls apart. And by 1755, Beauséjour falls. I mean, we're talking about a rapid 6-year slide from a brand new settlement straight into total chaos and full-scale siege. Now, this right here brilliantly illustrates why that conflict was pretty much inevitable. When 1,400 British settlers land in 1749 under Edward Cornwallis, their goal is crystal clear: permanent, exclusive settlement. It's theirs. But the Mi'kmaq, whose land this actually was, and the Acadians, who had already been living there for generations, they had a completely different vision. They wanted shared space. They just wanted strict neutrality and the endless back-and-forth wars between Britain and France. They weren't looking to conquer anybody. They literally just wanted to live in peace. Section 2. Resistance and Father Le Loutre. Naturally, the British pushing for exclusivity met some fierce pushback. And this resistance against the British wasn't just some abstract political struggle. It was deeply, deeply personal. Just a couple of years earlier, in 1747, a devastating smallpox epidemic ripped through the Mi'kmaq, and they firmly blamed the British, accusing them of deliberately spreading the infection. So obviously they absolutely refused to make peace. And this anger, it was fully supported and even stoked by a French Catholic priest named Father Jean-Louis Le Loutre. This quote from Le Loutre really hits the nail on the head regarding his role. Writing to his superiors, he said, "I think that we cannot do better than to incite the Indians to continue warring on the English." French officials knew exactly what they were doing here. They deliberately used him to fan the flames. It was a classic proxy war. France couldn't just officially declare war on Britain without sparking a massive global conflict, right? So they used the missionary to keep things completely unstable and basically bleed the British dry. Let's move to Section 3, the rise of irregular warfare. Let's see how this actually builds on the ground, because regular, line-up-in-a-field European warfare just did not work in the thick forests of Nova Scotia. Instead, combatants turned to what the French called petite guerre, or little war. So what is irregular warfare exactly? Well, it means throwing out the rulebook. We're talking unconventional tactics like ambushes, cutting off supply lines, and, this is absolutely crucial, deliberately targeting non-combatant civilian populations. And we know a lot about this thanks to some rigorous academic study, like this foundational dissertation by Captain John E. Grenier. He argues that this specific era forged what he calls the other American way of war. Irregular operations where the lines between a soldier and a civilian are completely erased didn't just pop up out of nowhere. They became central, institutionalized parts of Anglo-American military culture right here during this exact conflict. So what was the British answer to these French and Mi'kmaq raids? A highly specialized unit known as Gorham's Rangers. Commanded by John Gorham, this group was a mix of Mohawks and hardcore New England backwoodsmen. They were basically the premier British irregulars, and they fought a brutal shadow war. They aggressively hunted down anyone sympathetic to the French, and their entire strategy revolved around terrorizing the neutral Acadians into submission. Which brings us to Section 4, the scalp bounty system. To really incentivize this little war, authorities turned to something incredibly dark: the literal commercialization of killing. By 1750, the British governor put a bounty on Mi'kmaq's scalps. The price? A staggering £50. To put that into perspective for you, a laborer back then made maybe 2 shillings a day. £50 was an absolute fortune.
It was life-changing money, and it created this horribly lucrative market for violence, turning these backwoodsmen into land privateers who were literally hunting human beings for profit.
And if you look at the historical documents, they outline this system with just this chilling, cold bureaucracy. In some jurisdictions, the bounty eventually skyrocketed to £100 for an adult male scalp, and there were separate specific payouts for women and children. Let that sink in. This system legally and completely erased any line between an armed fighter and an innocent civilian walking through the woods.
Now, it is really important to note that even at the time, this was causing some serious internal moral conflict among the British. Check out this recorded exchange. A ranger party brings in a bunch of fake scalps to claim a £250 payout. Captain Huston completely objects. He calls it a guilty deed that should carry the curse of God. But his commander, Colonel Wilmot, just overrules him. Wilmot argues that the law might need to be strained a little, and that there was a necessity for winking at such things. The military gold just completely overrode any moral hesitation.
Section 5. The Fortified Chignecto Frontier.
Now, what's really interesting about this timeline is the stark contrast it shows. While rangers are out there exchanging scalps for cash, there were actually desperate, repeated attempts at peace. In 1750, again in 1752, and yet again in 1754, the Mi'kmaq and Acadians came to the table offering terms to create a shared, neutral territory. And every single time, the British authorities in Halifax flat out rejected it. They were absolutely unwilling to compromise on having total control. This constant diplomatic failure essentially created a massive fortified stalemate at the Chignecto Isthmus. You had the British building Fort Lawrence and the French building Fort Beauséjour right across from it, staring each other down. It turned the area into a bloody, utterly unsustainable buffer zone. The constant skirmishing completely ruined local agriculture. Nobody could safely hunt. So the Acadians and the Mi'kmaq, who were just trapped right in the middle of this, became totally dependent on French supply lines just to survive the winters. So, picture this. We have a heavily fortified border, local populations literally starving, irregular rangers burning down villages, and constant, brutal proxy attacks. How on earth did this relentless cycle of irregular warfare finally break? Section 6. The 1755 Acadian deportation. Well, it finally broke with one of the most infamous and, frankly, tragic events in North American history. The years of messy border skirmishing bridged directly into the mass expulsion of the Acadian people. And the thing is, the desire to remove this population wasn't some sudden spur-of-the-moment decision in 1755. It had been brewing among these irregular commanders for years. John Gorham, that ranger commander we talked about earlier, he openly believed that offering amnesties to the Acadians was just a strategic trick to, and I quote, make them easy until we can get them in our power to remove them.
And here is why this all matters. When Governor Charles Lawrence took power, he fully embraced those unlimited, irregular warfare tactics pioneered by guys like Gorham. So once the British finally capture the French Fort Beauséjour in 1755, that stalemate is broken, and Lawrence immediately orders the mass deportation of the Acadians. The big takeaway here is that this deportation wasn't just some random tragedy that happened to occur during the 7 Years' War. It was the direct, engineered climax of Father Le Loutre's war.
Which leaves us with this final, really heavy question to consider. Was the Acadian expulsion an inevitable tragedy of two colliding empires? Or was it the deliberately engineered result of a normalized system of unlimited war that had systematically erased the value of non-combatant lives over 6 brutal years? Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. I hope it got you thinking. Keep questioning the true origins of the history we think we know, and I'll see you next time as we break down another fascinating topic together.